I have Dr. Kishor Malavade, and we're going to go into a men's panel at this time. And so if you need a breath after all of our poetry, I'm going to just turn it over to Kishor. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I need a moment right now, but that was very powerful, and thank you. I think some of you may know me. I was here last year, and I want to thank Marilyn and everyone from Arthur Ashe and from Downstate who's made this happen again. It's good to see momentum building from what we were talking about last year. Again, for those who don't know me, I'm a psychiatrist from Maimonides. I've been working on a lot of community mental health and public mental health projects with partners like Arthur Ashe and many other community organizations in Brooklyn, and mostly in Brooklyn. I've been here for about 15 years doing this kind of work. So it's an honor to be here with everyone. I think talking about mental health, and we know it's a big challenge to address any aspect of it. But when we think about who really struggles to get access to that, and again, there are so many layers of barriers, but men of color, black men, there are just huge challenges, and we do not do enough. Certainly the healthcare system, which I know better than other things, but partly it's because the healthcare system always, talking to some folks before, it's often systems and organizations, and I think that was one of the final quotes on the board. It's like, it shouldn't exist. It's not about existing and perpetuating the organization and the systems, but sometimes it feels that way. So we do have to look beyond the systems, and I think, as I mentioned last year, I think we might feel like we're making success when people know how to find solutions to the problems that they're facing, and they certainly don't think of a doctor like me or a psychiatrist as the solution. I can help a lot of people. I have helped people. I'm happy to do that. I love doing that work, but there's got to be many other ways and many other paths to those places for people, because it's not always here. And we know that the system works for some, doesn't work for others. So until that changes, we still got to build out. So I'm really happy to help lead a panel right now and have some folks who have done things differently and thought about how to help people and have gotten down on the ground to help young men of color. And I think I don't know if, Marilyn, are you introducing them, or do you want?
Either way.
Yeah.
So for those that are on our panel, I'll just call you up and you could just take your seat. Javie Ellis, David Allen, James Johnson, Pastor James Johnson. So if you can all take your seat, and Kishor, you could be in the middle and you could
Thanks.
do your thing.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to take another collective breath before we start this amazing panel with these amazing men. Because there was a lot in the room. The poets brought a lot in the room, and people have walked in here with a lot in the room. So I'm going to ask you to join me in a few breaths, and then if you feel comfortable, I'm going to ask you to join me in one of my favorite meditations, which is called Loving Kindness. Okay? So please get comfortable in your seats. And if you feel comfortable, put your hand on your heart and your hand on your belly or anywhere. I just want you, again, like we did this morning, connect with your body. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes or look on the ground. And I want you to take a deep breath in to the belly and exhale through the mouth. We'll do this 4 more times. Deep inhale and exhale through the mouth. Deep inhale and exhale. Think of your breath cleansing all that you're carrying. Deep inhale and exhale. Deep inhale. And exhale. And while you're breathing, I will start the loving kindness meditation. And what I want you to do is bring to mind someone that you know absolutely loves you. And if you don't have someone, just think of something that represents love to you. And try to feel that love in your body. And while you're holding that feeling in your body, I want you to allow yourself to come to mind and anyone that you want to extend love, kindness, and compassion to, including you. And you can say this out loud or in your head, and I will start now. May we be held in loving kindness. May we be happy and safe. May we be healthy in body and in mind. May we always have enough. May we always know that we are enough. May our hearts know peace. And may we live with ease. I'm going to ask you to join me again. Take a deep breath in and exhale through the mouth. 2 more. Deep inhale and exhale. Last one. Deep inhale and exhale. Thank you all so much for taking that pause with me.
Going to start out just asking our panelists to introduce themselves and share some of your experience with mental wellness, I'll say, and both, professionally, personally, and maybe, Dr. Johnson, if we could start maybe with you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Dr. Friedrich, thank you so much, and the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health for inviting me. I know it was a last minute, but I'm more than happy to do it. I just recently stepped away from being project director at VIP Community Services in the Bronx. It was the harm reduction area. Prior to that, I was care manager for 4 years at VIP Community Services for 2 areas, the continuing 822 area and also for the opioid department. And I found the work rewarding, but it is exhausting because dealing between mental health disorders and substance use disorders takes a lot of time, takes a lot out of you. So I step back now from 2 months just to start in a consulting role to work with New York State in the area of health benefits and also in the area of consulting. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Javie Ellis. I serve as the senior pastor of Bushwick Family Ministries in the Bushwick community of Brooklyn. I just want to say thank you again for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, not only serving as senior pastor over the last year, but I've worked with youth over the last 10 years in youth ministry, exposed to young people dealing with domestic violence in the homes, trouble in the homes, one-parent households. And so it's a topic and issue that I've been, very involved in over the last 11 years. So happy to be here and share some insights.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Allen. I am the principal of Bard High School Early College, Brooklyn. And I also am a coach. I especially help educators to be able to do work that is excellent and equitable while at the same time keeping their minds, basically. I'm also doing a doctorate in educational leadership at American University, where they center anti-racism, and the whole idea of my research is how do we build sanctuary institutions? How do we build educational institutions that are sanctuaries for students, but also for the caregivers, right? Because often we forget the caregivers, and if the caregivers aren't healthy, they're not going to be healthy in their interactions with students, right?
Great, thank you. I think just reflecting on the different experiences each of you have and different environments that you've been in, can you talk a little bit about some of the types of barriers that men of color experience? We know obviously there are many external barriers, but there are also internal ones as well. I'm curious what your sense of those that you've seen and experienced over time, and the things that keep them from people from getting the help they may need and support they need.
I can start with the internal barriers. So around the year 2000, a friend of mine told me, David, I think you're depressed. And I said, you must be wrong because I'm Jamaican. Jamaicans don't get depressed, right? But I had hit a wall. I was working in a school and I had to do these narratives for every student, and I couldn't write one narrative. They suspended my classes. They put me in a room and say, your only job right now is to write these narratives. But I was done. I was staring at the wall, and I was just totally gone. And, on her suggestion, I went to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, yes, you are depressed. And then he said, you should try medication. I said, no. What other alternatives are there, right? Because the other things Jamaicans don't do is medication when it comes to mental health, right? But eventually, after trying different things and maybe helping a little, but I was still in need of something else. And so I did try medication, and I was able to see the world completely different. It's like a veil lifted from my eyes. And a lot of people think of depression as something concerning sadness, and there was sadness, but it was overwhelmingly not having the energy to do anything. And the medication at first didn't work because they tried one thing and that didn't work. And so we had to try something else. And the second thing worked amazingly, right? And I was able to get that space to start healing. But most of the barriers for me were internal. I was lucky to have a job where I could afford to go to a therapist. I was lucky to be able to have health care and be able to afford medication. There was some stigma externally to get over, like I had to call and tell them that I was depressed, and there was a delay there because you had to get pre-approval from the health providers. But I was grateful for that those barriers didn't exist. And so the biggest barriers for me were internal.
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know if others want to address there.
I'll jump in here. I am Jamaican as well. I guess men in general, and I know a lot of Caribbean men, there's a stigma of men are not allowed to be vulnerable. Our men we must be macho and strong all the time. And I actually think that's the biggest sign of weakness. Every man needs someone that they can be vulnerable with. The Bible says in Galatians 6, I'm a pastor, so I have to add some scripture, but it says that we are to share one another's burdens, and therefore we fulfill the law of Christ. And so every man needs a brother that they can be vulnerable with. I don't care how old you are, how young you are, we need someone that we can tap into and say, hey, I'm going through something right now. On my way here, a friend called me, and he is going through a lot. He said, Javie, what do I do? I'm asked to take on this position, and this is church. He says, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing this one. And I said, you're doing a lot. It's okay to say no sometimes. And we have to learn to say no to good things in order for us to say yes to better things and making the best use of our times. And so the stigma of men, we need to be vulnerable, macho and strong all the time is one of the biggest lies, I believe, that's impacting men in general, and especially our black community. Externally, I think financial is another a barrier. We don't have access to funds, or some don't have access to health care. And because of that lack of knowledge of free resources such as Arthur Ashe and the ability to connect people to different resources and organizations throughout the city, that's keeping our people sort of backing from getting the help that they do so much need and deserve.
I really can. I think Javie and David said it all. I can sit back now and just be a spectator. But they are both correct. Men of color, African American men, Hispanic men, they don't share feelings. We're taught not to share feelings. We're taught to, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in our family household stays in our family household. And the work that I've done with my clients over the years, I found that it's difficult for them to talk. Women talk. I love women. Just having them around, grandmother, mother, aunts, sisters, sister-in-laws. You all talk at a dime. It's not a barrier. You talk. You talk with each other. Men, we don't share the stuff we're going through. And I can say the medical profession hasn't helped either, because if we go back to the area of the Tuskegee, the syphilis experiment that went on from 1932 to 1972 for 40 years, because my father-in-law is from Alabama. And the experiments with syphilis that was done on them, that's one area where we just don't trust the medical profession, trust them about us. We talked about that this morning. And our men have to get past that. And that's one of the things I work with my clients, because I would ask them, what happened? And I always go back to what happened with you as an adolescent. Because my clinical work that I did, because I went to seminary, and I got my degrees, my master's and doctorate in pastoral care and counseling with a cohort in psychotherapy. And I didn't want to become a pastor. And some of my professors got mad, you have it. But I said, no, you need some pastoral counselors, because a pastor cannot do it all. What happens to those church members that have problems? Pastors are like wounded healers. They have to take care of the budget. They have to take care of the community. They have to take care of the church members. They have to take care of fundraising. And then they have their own families. Who takes care of them? So I always thought that there should be an arm in the church where counseling should be mainstay. And that was my dissertation, exploring depression in African American men. And I was privileged to have some psychologists work with me in that, because they said depression is just too big in just men. You got to pick a specific group. So I picked African American men and also Latino men. And when I transitioned into the workforce and I began to see clients, and I always asked them, what happened? You told me all about yourself. And they would say, stuff happened when I was young. And that's ideology. You always got to go back. You have family trees, but I worked with genograms. Genograms, where family trees are just your family. Genograms talk about the relationships, the family dynamics, the broken relationships, the hurt, the unresolved issues. And depression falls under that, and other mental health disorders. So we really have to look at those barriers that stop men from really being themselves. And it also affects relationships. The women, the partners, the mothers. Who do we deal with? How do we deal with them? Because who you marry, who you love, who I say, you take on their responsibilities. You take on those characteristics. So you have to deal with it.
Can I add one more thing? Because I'm glad that there are two men on the panel who have gotten training in the Bible, in seminary, because one of the barriers for me was the church, because sometimes, the church that I was a part of, and I know there are different churches and at different levels of maturity when it comes to mental health, but the church that I was a part of for a long time, they were very suspicious of mental health workers, of going to a therapist, of taking medication, and some of what I had to overcome was that it wasn't unspiritual, right? It wasn't unspiritual to get help. It wasn't unspiritual to go to a therapist. It wasn't unspiritual to get help through medication, right? And so I'm glad that is the case with you. And the church that I went to over time changed its stance, but in the meantime, I and a lot of other people got hurt because of that.
Dave, I'm glad you brought that up because in church we tend, is off? Okay.
No, it's on.
Okay. Yeah, closer. I sometimes I think my voice projects enough, but it doesn't sometimes. In church, we tend to say God takes care of everything, and prayer handles everything, and that's a nice antidote. But why did God make doctors? Why did He make professionals?
Right.
If you don't use them and go to them.
Right.
So use them.
Right.
And there's a stigma with going to help, especially a black man. Man, listen, 16 years ago, I went through a heartbreaking situation. And I could have fallen through the cracks. But thank God I had great support systems around me. And I recovered. Thank God. And I say, whatever I thought I lost, I think I got like 3 or 4 times back everything. And especially the woman I have, I say she's God-given. And she just happens to be a supervising RN. So she said, you have to tell your story, James. If you keep it to yourself about what you went through, how can you help other men? Because they need to hear that another man struggles, that he's hurt, that he's broken, that he's vulnerable. And they say real men don't cry. I said, you're not a real man if you don't cry.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, this is great, and thank you for bringing that up. I think, you've all touched on some key points here, I'm glad, even stepping it back to forgetting about mental health, just health, because again, as you know, I think it was Jerome of France. Talked about, right? It's like what we see and I see as a doctor is certainly mental health that's not being addressed, but health issues that are not being addressed. There's so much mistrust in the healthcare system that we obviously need places and spaces outside of there. But then when you bring in the layer of mental health, where it becomes so much more vulnerable for anyone, and you're asking someone to trust. So I'm really glad you brought up the idea of sharing, but I'm wondering if you guys could talk about some of the other things you've done to create that space that's safe and that allows someone to build that trust that they can open up and be vulnerable, because it's without getting there that you really can't heal if you're not able to be vulnerable like that.
I think, as we talk about being vulnerable and creating a safe space, especially in the church, I want to touch the prayer thing, but we'll get there maybe later if we have time. The most important thing is to establish relationship, especially as it pertains to young black men. They will not open up until there is a relationship. There's a quote from a book, I don't remember the author, but he said, correction without relationship is actually abuse. Before you can reach a young person, you have to get to know them. And so in order to create that safe space, one thing, we preach and practice in our church is having that relationship. Now, I want to read this quote because I saw it earlier. You may know them. This individual, Bessel van der Kolk. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. But he said, being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. And so with that, in creating safe space, we've broken our congregation from one big group into smaller groups. We need community, right? Often if you gather in a size group like this, the likelihood of everyone opening up may not happen. But if you get in a small group with men, 5, 6, 7 people, and someone starts sharing, right, and you model vulnerability, the likelihood of individuals opening up will happen. I've seen it happen. Last year we had a couples retreat, and it was a group of men that gathered. And as we started sharing in that small group, you saw men that wouldn't usually speak. They felt compelled. This is a safe space. I feel the trust. I feel the love. I don't feel judged by what I'm going to share. And so he started to open up and share some struggles he was having in his marriage. And that was because he felt safe in that smaller group setting, and we modeled vulnerability as the leaders.
Yeah, I think another way of saying what you said with that quote is that people don't care how much you know unless they know you care, right? And it's important to establish that. I think it's important, where we can start with community or we can start with ourselves, but have a starting point. So if you start with yourself, mindfulness has helped me a lot. Being able to just have those moments where you are in touch with who you are, where you are in this moment, and that you have those techniques that will help you to stay grounded and be able to start with yourself and then connect to others and connect to the world around you. So mindfulness has been helpful. Prayer has been helpful. But then when it comes to community, so a lot of our mental health models in the West is I as an individual take on your trauma, right? And then I may get traumatized myself, and I need to go get help. Maybe that happens to you every now and again, right? But when we look at indigenous communities, when we look at our ancestral communities, we deal with trauma in community, right? We get together, we sing, we dance, and we take on each other's trauma as a community, and that way it is not any one person taking it on. So the more we have those opportunities to be in groups, to share the struggles that we have, I think is the more powerful we're going to be.
I know when we spoke this morning in the breakout groups, we spoke in the area of for our senior citizens and providing a space for them. And we've mentioned focus groups. We mentioned opportunities for them to express. Why not for young men? They need that space. They need that opportunity to express themselves, because men of color express themselves differently because we live in a different society. As much as we talk about diversity, as much as we talk about equality, as much as we talk about being respectful of culture, there's not that much respect. There's not that place where they can really express themselves. We need that place, that safe place. Dave and Javie said it right. There has to be trust first. Because even when you talk to do counseling, the first thing they're going to do, they talk about, they won't open up to you until they trust you. I did clinical work in the VA hospital when I did my clinical pastoral education. And working with veterans, I always say they're trained men. They're like trained killing machines because they're taught to get the enemy. And I walked in one day, and I had a chance to talk to a veteran, African-American man, and he said to me, as I got his trust, he said to me, James, if you weren't who you were, I wouldn't have anything to do with you. And that made me think. And I said, thank God for the opportunity to, whatever words that was said, at least they were words of sympathy, compassion, that he could derive something from that. And he could say, I can make contact with you. So we have to, in harm reduction, the program I was over, that's the new thing in substance use disorder. It's called meeting the client where they are. And don't worry about them taking drugs. It's just you making sure that they're in a safe space. That's what harm reduction is. It's not saying, oh, get off of drugs. How do they exist while they have their substance use disorder? And that's the new thing with the government and the federal authorities, OASIS and SAMHSA. They're looking toward more of that because sometimes they find that it just doesn't work trying to get folks off of drugs. That it's not that easy.
Can I say one other thing? I mean, if we look around this room, right, and look at who is in this room, it's mostly women, right? And unfortunately, it still is a case that if men's health are going to get better, it often is a woman in their life who prompts them to do that. And I'm not going to ask you to do one more thing for men, because you've done a lot for men. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing with men, which is, I like the sandwich method, right? You want somebody to do something, you do the sandwich method, you say something nice about them, right? And then you ask them to do the difficult thing, and then you say something nice again, right? And if you could just, with one male in your life, say something nice about them, but then instead of suggesting what they do, ask them, what is one thing you can do to enhance your mental health? And again, you're doing it with them rather than for them, right? And they will choose something that's doable, because sometimes the things that we ask men to do, we want them to go from 0 to 60, right? And they're not going to do that. The Arthur Ashe motto, meet people where they are, right? So if you can invite them to do just one thing, one of my favorite questions to ask myself throughout the day is, what is the one thing I can do to make everything else easier or unnecessary, right? And if we ask the men in our lives, what's the one thing you can do to make everything else easier or unnecessary towards your mental health? And by the way, your tie looks good or something, right?
I like that. I want to, in coming back to this side and some of the, you referenced getting back a little bit to prayer and some of the other spiritual aspects. I think, often the healthcare system has also used itself as a power play, right? There's professional knowledge, and sometimes that can come. It can be very powerful and necessary. I am familiar with it being used when it wasn't helpful, because people weren't thinking clearly as professionals. But also we keep, and this is in all of our society, we keep a lot of our professional skills, experience to ourselves, right? And say we can't share those. Obviously, that's a model that can and should change. And some of the folks here have experience in what a physician in New Mexico said, democratizing medical knowledge and sharing that out into the community. But we also miss things coming from where we're at, partly from experience, partly from all this professional training, and you get farther and farther away from the community. You guys talk about, and I think it pertains to schools as well. It's like, when you're there, what are the things that we're missing in the profession that you're seeing, and are some of the skills that you think you're using that allow you to, again, break some of those barriers, create trust? Because I think there's much that the healthcare system needs to learn from outside. They're off in a paternalistic way, thinking, oh yeah, we can share what we know, and that's going to solve the problems down in the community. But in fact, we're often wrong about some of the things we know. And I'm not, obviously, there are clearly things we do know and we have learned over time. I definitely feel it's, medications, pharmacotherapy, the science of it, we've been better. The medical profession, when it comes to therapy, though, is highly lacking, and I can tell you, my experience in training as such was very minimal. So I'm just curious what you've all learned from the worlds you live in and what those provide to give you those skills that allow you to do the work you do.
I think for me, it comes back to this idea that everybody has expertise, right? I have expertise about my body, I have expertise about my emotions, and so I'm not interested at all in going to a professional who doesn't want to hear my expertise and is only interested in telling me his expertise. I definitely want to hear his expertise. I definitely want to hear about the medication. I want to hear about his training, whether it's whatever that angle is it chemotherapy, is it CBT, whatever that training is, I definitely want to benefit from that. But if they're not interested in really listening to me and really listening to what I know about my body and I know about my mental health, then I'm not interested in that person. And we should know that we have choice. We can go to a therapist, and if that therapist isn't working, we can switch, right? And so what I do, this is something I practice as a principal, right? I don't want to do things for students. One of my guiding principle as an educator is never do for students what they can do for themselves. Right? And so I want to be in partnership with students and hear what's working for them, what's not working for them, hear what their needs are. And the same thing with the teachers in my school, right? What's going to make you a better teacher? Let me hear that. And so this idea of partnership with individuals, but partnership with communities. Communities have so much knowledge, and we have to respect the knowledge that communities have about themselves, right? And we have to respect the knowledge individuals have about themselves. And if we can have that partnership of mutual respect, where communities learn to trust medical professionals, right, then we can go towards true healing.
Stepping outside the box from a clinical aspect and from the training, I found that it's so important because, as I said, working with people with substance use disorders and they're trying now, they're in recovery, or they're trying, to work toward recovery. Yeah. And I always ask them, have you forgiven yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you validated who you are as an individual?
Yeah.
Yeah, you made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Some of us just haven't got caught. But there go, for the grace of God, I can use, there go I. But I said, you have to learn to love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. If you don't validate who you are as an individual, how can you tell anybody else, oh, you're doing great? So you got to learn to bring that self-esteem back up. African-American men, Latino, we have to bring that self-esteem. Men of color, we have to appreciate who we are, what we bring to the table. There's a lot on our shoulders sometimes. We're leaders, we're conquerors, we're protectors of our women, of our family, of our friends, of our mothers and aunts and grandmothers. And everybody looks to us sometimes for answers. And sometimes we don't have all the answers, but sometimes I said, I appreciate your help, but sometimes I just don't have the answer. Let me think about it a little while. But then they see that vulnerability. So with all of our men, I would say, let's celebrate ourselves. Pat yourself on the back. Say, you know what, I think I can do it. If you don't have the answer, find it from somebody else. Get a support system, some brothers right there.
Yeah, I think it's both sides that we miss it, not just from the health professional side. I think the faith-based organization, the churches miss the mark as well, because often we tell people, go pray about it. And we leave them, and we forget about them. It broke my heart a few months ago, and it was a female, but African-American, lost her husband and have 2 young kids to raise. And the church told her, go pray about it, and we're praying for you. And it broke my heart that we weren't walking with her and doing more for. So it's not just the health, care side that's missing. I think the church as well. I think to help, we need to see ourselves as partners,
Right.
and not enemies, right? Because as a doctor said here, God has put doctors in place for a reason, and has gifted them for a reason. So we need to come together and work together and not denounce what you say, and you can't denounce what I say, and say prayer don't work, and then we can't say medicine don't work. I do believe in divine healing, but I do believe there is space where we can come together and work together for the benefit of our communities.
I think that's a great point. I mean, we all miss it, right? We all can just be staring at something right in front of us and just letting them walk and suffer. I mean, again, the last poem was really powerful. Probably none of us saw the turn that it was going to take, right? Because it's right there. Yes, community organization. So we're all seeing everyone, but not seeing them at times unless we tune ourselves in. So, what are the kind of things, and I think you've alluded to some of the things, but kind of things that the people who do listen, who do care, what are the kind of things we need to cultivate in all of us, ourselves? Because I truly believe this, we get to solutions when we're all going to be involved in some ways. It's not just going to be doctors and, pastors and educators who are doing this. It's got to be something in all of us. What are the kind of things you think you recognized in yourselves that allowed you to kind of go down this path and start seeing things that people don't want to see? It's uncomfortable. We don't want, people don't, I don't want to ask the questions because I'm not sure I know how to deal with the answers. What kind of advice would you give to people about the kind of things you've had that you've seen and recognized within yourselves, but also that are, probably within so many of us and all of us, that can help each and everyone here, and they can share it with people outside, ways to listen and see, and not to not make things invisible.
Yeah. I was thinking about some of the techniques that I use. One of them I shared earlier in the senior discussion. That is, often when we have a problem, whether it's a mental health problem or some other problem in our lives, we think, how? How am I going to solve this problem? And if we could just really develop the habit instead of asking who, right? Who, not how. That is, I have a problem. Who's going to help me solve this problem? And sometimes the answer is you're going to be that person because nobody else is around. But often the answer is relatives, friends, people in your community, a professional, right? And if you keep asking that who question, we wrestle so much with things on our own, when if we just pull one other thought partner in, if we pull one other person in, we talk about body doubles, just somebody sitting there doing it with you sometimes. As somebody who struggled with depression, it made a huge difference if somebody was just there with me doing some of the simplest tasks, right? So who is it going to be? Who's going to be your advocate? Who's going to be that person who is going to just check in with you and say how things going? Who's going to be the person who's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and make sure you make those calls, even though it seems like it's an easy thing to do, but it's hard for you. So I'm just going to sit with you as you make these calls. And so that idea of who, not how, and then just breaking things down to really simple, small steps, right? You want to get better. What's the one thing, just one thing you're going to do that's going to make everything easier or unnecessary? And the smaller the step is, the better.
Either one of you have...
I can say I agree with David. Finding someone that supports you, not being afraid to speak out, showing your vulnerability, showing that that you don't, sometimes it's all right to say you don't have it all together. You don't have the answer. Nobody has the answer for everything.
Right.
But at least to know the fact, listen, if I can't do this or I can't help you, well, I'll find someone who can. Take some of that weight off of your own shoulders and show that, listen, I can help you in one way. I can be a support system. I can be a resource for you. And that's how I've always been in my life. Listen, I just always tried to be a resource, put people together with circumstance, with situations, with organizations, for jobs or a good doctor. Listen, this is what helped me, and this will help you.
More so adding to my colleagues' responses, but I saw on the chart paper behind me is network, youth networks, and you have to identify who's in your network. I have people in congregants in the church that I can share stuff with. There are some that I can pray with and have them pray for me. Minister Dawn in the back, when something really ticks me off, I can be completely vulnerable and honest with her. So you have to identify your network. I have my friends, whether in ministry or outside of ministry, that I can talk not just church to, but life with. I can talk about my marriage, my daughter. So you have to identify your network and who is in that network that's going to be better able to help you and aid you when you're going through your different mental health journeys.
Oh, thank you. I know we're reaching time and I'm going to wrap up. I want to really thank each of you for taking the time to come and talk, share. I think we really, and I hear this, and people have been talking throughout the day, network is important. There has to be, when we think about all those internal and external barriers that men of color face, it's got to be wherever they're walking, wherever they're stepping, there's some opportunity there for people to be able to see something, hear something. Even if they don't have the solutions themselves, as you point out, I can help guide you where you can get those, find some help. And there are many different layers of help, and I'm sure you guys could talk much more about how that all goes. But again, just thank you so much for sharing your time.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Just one other thing. So thanks to Arthur Ashe for the work that you're doing in barbershops, going to meet the community where they are. And, one of the challenges I'm putting for myself is reaching out. Often it's so instinctual to reach out for help as a man towards a woman, right? Because women are available, they want to help, they have been helpful in the past, and if we could just make deliberate efforts, like I'm trying to make deliberate efforts to reach out to connect with men, and let's say if you just have 3 connections, it makes such a difference, right? So, this is an appeal to myself and to other men in the room, just to reach out and just have those 3 people that are men that you can reach out to and connect with and just have that camaraderie with.
Other final thoughts you would like to share that we haven't covered?
Like I said, I never met these 3 gentlemen here, but I feel that we connected just not even knowing each other, seeing each other before. There's a synergy. We just fed off of each other. So I appreciate, blessings to all of y'all. I really appreciate being a part.
Yeah, it was absolute pleasure. I'm grateful to be here. I'm so thankful that this topic has become such a prevalent topic in the faith-based community. Arthur Ashe, we have the kiosk in our church. I'm proud of that. And so our members are able to go to that station and fill out their information and get whatever help they may need. We're seeing in our church workshops and trainings on mental health for us as leaders to be able to discern the symptoms and recognize someone that's going through something and not just say, hey, go and pray. And so in closing, continue the work you're doing, Arthur Ashe and everyone, the partners here, in educating and providing the education to our communities. I believe the more we're exposed to the information, the more of our leaders that are trained, the better it will be, not just for our black men, but our black women, our young boys, and our young girls. So God bless you all, and thank you again.
Linda?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. We're not leaving yet.
Okay, we're
Not
not
just
leaving.
yet. We got to take questions. I apologize.
I don't have a question.
Oh, okay.
I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for making things clearer for me in my mind as to why men don't interact with one another. Because I see it myself. They can party with each other and all this stuff, and they're all dressed up, and they tell each other where they get clothes from, but they won't tell each other really what's going on. And I just want to thank you, gentlemen, because I wasn't going to come. I found out about it yesterday, but I'm so glad I'm here because I have several men in my life. I have no daughters. I have 2 sons. I have a guy, whatever. But this information I will pass on, and it just made me understand them better. And I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming out and sharing.
I'm going to stand up because I want to be bold in what I'm going to say. I think I appreciate the invitation I had to come here a second time. It might have been the 3rd consecutive time I've been affiliated with this symposium. It's the first time I'm not wearing my military hat. Not because it was cold, but I thought to myself I need to open up. I thought that I not hearing certain things that would cause me to walk away like I have done once before. When Jim spoke about the military and the veterans, it resonated with things that I'm dealing with. I am a veteran. I've been in combat for 1 year exactly. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I've experienced quite a bit. I would always say to certain fellows, you cannot be in the same foxhole as I, for reasons like you don't know what you're talking about. And my pushback, as of today even, is vulnerability. I will not tell you about me when I believe the training that I have had make me feel I can advocate for myself. We were talking with the seniors, and we say, who is your who? I'm being bold to stand here and share with you. I'm having a very difficult time dealing with my situation. Even as I walk away just now, I was going to leave. My sister's here, and some you know who you are. Real quickly, I am from Barbados. It's important I say that. Culturally, it makes a difference for me to say that I am the first Barbadian to be in Vietnam. And as a result of that, they had me, did a talk show with someone back then. My training as a military has a lot to do with the culture I had back then also. Succinctly speaking, I was not willing to share with anyone the experiences that I had dealt with as a combat person. But more importantly, because of a recent situation I have encountered that has triggered some things. It's caused me to come here for the help I think I need. And I thank Dr. Fraser for inviting me a second time. I just lost my wife, maybe just over 6 months ago. And that, in conjunction with my experience of being in the military, did not help me at all. But God knows best, my dear pastor friend. Maybe 6 months short of 50 years, I would have been with her. And it's difficult to be alone. But I am so grateful that you have asked us to open up and be vulnerable. I'm not going to be vulnerable today, but I am considering it. There are so many that advocate for me in my church. My father was a pastor, her father was a pastor, all my siblings are children of God. I know the way. But as you have said, it's drilled into me. I would have missed this and be late because I was busy trying to make my bed up. We would say our bunk. It's drilled in me. And everything I do goes back to my training, my discipline. After 1 year in South Vietnam, I received an honorary award for my service there. And I believe that my pushback is that I can handle this. I don't need you guys. I don't need anyone, but it's not true. And I thank you, Dr. Fraser, for asking me to come and to even share this now with you. It makes me feel like I needed to do this. I've been encouraged to do therapy. My only son, he's in therapy now too. And I thank you for your help. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Lawrence, first of all, our sincerest condolences to you and your family and lost your wife, and also thank you for your service, too, as an African-American man serving this country. Thank you so much. Our prayers are with you.
And congratulations for the panel. I'm part of the Arthritis Institute. My name is Humberto Brown. I like the presentations. I like the skills, the knowledge. But I think that the issue of men and the discussion of men, there was a sister, she passed now, who wrote a book called Willingness to Change. And she said, even though we discuss the issue of male feminism, we don't discuss the ideology that produces patriarchy. What defines us as men? The construct of what men mean, maleness. Why go across race, gender? What construct that? Because it's not DNA, it's not genes, socially constructed. I'm from Panama, I know the Caribbean very well. I've been to Jamaica, parents' background, grandparents from Jamaica, right? And we have discussed men and health, right? The issue of sexual orientation. We discuss diseases that people say, I'm not a batty man, I'm not going to do that anal exam. I do international work, so I've been to the Caribbean a lot, trying to address these issues through policies, right? Parliament. And there's a resistance because we don't discuss how do we construct what validates you as a man. And I think we're in a moment, as the discussion reflects that, right, where we're deconstructing it from this gender rigid that you learn it before you know who you are. Don't walk that way. Don't do this. And people have done a lot of work. You know, we are socializing into madness. And we get imprisoned to those roles, either in the military, sexually, a father, no vulnerability, but it's socially constructed. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of work being done now to understand that ideology. And when you talk to the young people, you're getting much of that. There's the poetry today.
Right.
It's deconstructing that maleness that is changing, right, both for orientation of gender. And I think it's important that we take it, because if not, we kind of put it in a box of maleness, like it was something that we're born with and is socially constructed. I'm not the same man that I was 18. As you study, as you expose, as you married, as you get politically more savvy, right? And I want to end because people mention James Baldwin not by accident. Because James was gay, he was radical, he was against U.S. racism, he was a Pan-Africanist. I mean, he identified with the liberation in Africa and the Caribbean and the civil rights movement here. It was political in the reconstruction of maleness out of the white male colonizer concept of maleness. So I think we have to be careful that we don't personalize. I think the brother contribution, everything is truthful that you said. All of us been through that. We hide our pain, we don't share with the wife, don't know anything. What the sister just said, we party all night, and your friend discovered that you divorced last night and you're living by your cousin. You didn't share that. But isn't that so why? Is our role of understanding of the socially constructed maleness. So the next time we have this panel, I'd like us to endeavor with some of the ideology that reproduce itself in different parts of the world in a different way but produce the same behavior. That imprison us to feel, understand. Bell Hooks said, my father who I love, who take care of me, wanted me to be a doctorate, but physically abused me when I didn't behave the way he wants me to behave.
Right.
So I'm the person that I expect love. It was a cruelty that he think was natural in his role as a father. And I end with this, and patriarchy is not a male thing, it's a system thing. The mother developed to protect the father, the kids protected it, that the father is the image and the most powerful person, and we reproduce that. So he's trapped there. So I like us the next time we have stuff to get into some of the stuff, because that's the only way we unpack it with the complexity and diversity that it represents today. A lot of young people walk around with pain because their parents can't see them. Kids who are gay, who have different function about malenesses. And I think we need to work on that to kind of deconstruct it a little more. Thanks for sharing your opinions
Brother.
and your experience.
Brother, thank you. What you talked about is a whole conference unto itself, because my grandfather was born in Panama, so I appreciate that reference. There's a book, Man Not, by Dr. Curry, and what Dr. Curry argues is that this idea of patriarchy, we have to be very careful what we own and what we don't own as black men. That when you think of patriarchy, the hallmarks of patriarchy is economic power, political power, and sexual dominance, right? And if you break those down, black men don't have a lot of political power in our society generally. Black men generally don't have a lot of economic power compared to other people. And although we have this reputation, what he argues is that we have an oversized reputation for sexual dominance, that black boys often are vulnerable sexually, and that gets underreported, that there's a lot of sexual vulnerability that young boys, and there's a statistics about how many young boys are molested or sexually assaulted before they're 10 years old, right? But it's not talked about a lot, right? And so a lot of what we receive as our idea of what it is to be male is fabricated by other people, right? And so we have to be careful what we accept about that, what messages we accept. And as an educator, I know that this is something I'm very wary of, because we have this idea that black boys come to school, for example, and it's the school's job to make sure that they get right and they become great citizens. What the research is showing is school is a problem. School gives black boys identities that they either have to brace against and say, no, I'm not going to be that. Schools very, very early, from kindergarten, says you're good, you're bad. And the criteria they use to say you're good, you're bad often is white supremacist ideas, right? So from very early, black boys are given these identities. And they it's class also, and when they resist it, then they're bad, right? And so we have to. You're right. We have to examine all those things, but that's a whole different conference. And man, it's good. Yeah, we'll get there.
Thank you.
Last question.
A real short comment and then a question. The comment first, congratulations. Thank you for your service, a Vietnam veteran. I'm a Vietnam veteran also. The second part, I'd like to say there's two panelists who mentioned that they suffer from depression. It took a lot of courage. When I was in my early 40s, I also suffered from depression, and I was quite suicidal, and I didn't know I was depressed. And I just gotten a divorce, so I moved from New Jersey, where I lived, and I moved to New York. And then one day, my former wife called me up, said, "You didn't pay me and send the check this month." I said, "I don't have any money. I can't make any money." She said, "You can't make any money?" I said, "No, I can't make any money. I won't pay you this month. I'll try to pay you next month." She called me up a few days later, and she says, "You have an appointment 6 o'clock Monday on 73rd Street in Central Park West. He's a black psychiatrist. He's about your age. You're suffering from mental depression. You be there." And I went there for a year and a half. He saved my life. And so someone said, "Ladies, when you see depression in your man, help them out." Because I was suicidal, but I didn't know I was depressed. Every morning when I left my apartment, I had on a pretty suit. Every day I got my shoes shined. I drove my car. My car stayed clean and pretty. I didn't know I was depressed. And so you may see something in the man in your life that he doesn't see, because I would have committed suicide had my wife not told me that. So that's my comment. My question is, with young men, and I say it, young men, black men get the most attention about it as a result of this presidential election, but I think it's young black men, young white men, young Spanish men. Men all seem to feel, young men, under 30 or 35 or 40, that the world owes them something. Not just black men, all men. Like what you talked about, male privilege. You got to respect me, I'm a man. Why I got to respect you because you're a man? Does a woman have a right to say you got to respect me because I'm a woman? My minister, I have a vacation house in Florida. I was just down there to put up my Christmas tree lights. I live in Teaneck, but I was down in Florida to put up my Christmas tree lights. My minister said to me down there, "George, I've been asking you for this money for over 2 years. Why don't you give the church $50,000? I said, "Reverend, I don't owe the church $50,000. What makes you think I owe you money?" And I think this is what Donald Trump tapped into with young men, why they voted for him. Because women are doing very, very well in life. And young black men, Spanish men, and white men are not doing so well. But it's the women that go to college. I visit black colleges as a hobby. If you go to a black college, I ask all of the ladies, "Where are you from?" "Detroit." "New York." "Chicago." Ask the black guys, "Where are you from?" "Ghana." "Senegal." "Panama." There's not a black boy in college from New York City. They're all upstate. And so what do we do about this entitlement that young people feel that we owe them something? Like, I'm supposed to hand you some kind of wealth. Nobody handed me wealth. They handed me opportunity. I work like a dog. I work 80 hours a day, 80 hours a week now. I'm almost 80 years old. So what do we do about this feeling that young men, black men, white men, Spanish men, have this feeling of entitlement, but they're not willing to do the work so that they can take advantage of all the benefits that we have here in America that nobody else has? We live a better life than any people have ever lived in the history of the world, and yet so many young men are still upset. What do we do about that? Thank you.
So I'll answer since I work with young men. So I think, like with any population that you work with, we have to listen to people. So we have to listen to young men and hear what they're saying. And if you listen to them, what you hear a lot of is confusion, right? So we're living in an age where we are questioning rightfully what it is to be male, what it is to be female, what it is to be non-binary. And there are a lot of questions and not a lot of answers right now. And sometimes when there is confusion, it's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to learn and grow and to redefine things. And really, it's an opportunity for young men to understand what's at stake and be partners in defining what it is to be male. What happens in confusion, though, is that opportunists arise. So you have the Andrew Tates of the world who comes on and says, you're confused, and all of your problems are because you're confused about what it is to be male. Let me tell you what it is to be male. And they listen to him because his answer is clear, it's concise, it's entertaining, and it touches on things that they like. And Donald Trump comes along and says, you're confused, so let me tell you what it is to be a man. And he is entertaining, and he's concise, and he's clear, and he's like, this is it. He's not, there's no doubt in his definition, right? It's like, this is the greatest definition of what it is to be male ever, right? That's how he talks, with that kind of certainty. And when people come along with certainty, in an age of confusion, people gravitate towards them. And so we have to listen to the confusion that the young men are having and help them to say, listen, you can go to these pundits and just take wholesale what they say it is to be male, or we can give you some tools to help you figure out what that means and what it means and what it doesn't mean.
So we'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you all for participating in a wonderful discussion.